Here we go. All right. So I'll share the screen. And here are the opening prayers. Huh. There it is. Okay. Sashi Purge Shushin Medo Tan Rira Linjin in the Gamba Dia Sange Shindu Mede Uwagi Dogunanda Jinga Jubajo Idam Guru Rana Mandala Kane Tayami Sange Jodon Sugi Jonamla Janju Badu Dani Gazuji Dagi Juji Gibe Sanangi Dola Beji Sanbajo Sange Jodon Sugi Jonamla Janju Badu Dani Gazuji Dagi Juji Gibe Sanangi Dola Beji Sanbajo Bashu Sangye Jodon Sugi Jonamla Janju Badu Dani Gazuji Dagi Juji Gibe Sanangi Dola Beji Sange Duba Shu. Okay, so last time we got up, I think, to verse 16. Is that correct? When an illusion manifests or when it is dispelled, one who knows the illusion is not confused. One ignorant of the illusion is entranced by it. Am I correct? Is that where we left off? Can anybody remember? I'll put up the Tibetan so we can look at that verse. So, so this is getting into why is it so important to understand emptiness correctly? There's bad news about emptiness and good news about emptiness, depending on whether you're looking at it through the lens of ego or you're looking at it through the lens of Buddha nature. So, from the viewpoint of ego, it's bad news. So, because basically the eye grasping that we all have, you know, this is my body, this is my mind, this is me, this is mine. That aspect of us tries to accumulate more and more. You can see it in the world where greed and everything is at the top of the food chain. And so, for that perspective of trying to find security by grabbing territory and trying to defend your territory, when you hear, oh, well, actually, I think it was Jiddu Krishnamurti who said, ego is a circle of defense around nothing. So basically, all of that grasping at territory is for no real essence. All those people, as a friend of mine used to say, he who dies with the most toys dies. And in the Buddhist point of view, it's really futile because at the time of death, you leave it all behind anyway. And the only thing you take forward is your karma. And if you've spent your life hoarding resources and trying to do away your enemies, and that's been your legacy, then that's what defines what you become. And so it brings you only suffering. And so I said that there's good news and bad news about emptiness. The bad news is really for that egotism and all of the things it tries to do to find security in samsara. And the good news is for Buddha nature that if we can just realize that that's our nature is empty of any self. Um, Everything about us is dependent on something else. If we can realize that thoroughly, then that liberates us from the mental afflictions and all the problems that they cause and from the creation of karma. If we can really live in that space where we dwell in the wisdom that realizes our emptiness. So, this verse 16 is really talking about those two different perspectives, the perspective of ignorance and the perspective of wisdom. Gansei means when, Yuma Jungsheam, when that arising of an illusion, Gansei at that time, Jipa Gur Nyamdu, at that time, when that illusory arising dissolves, Juma Shepa means the one who knows that it was an illusion from the beginning. In this case, think of a magician who's conjuring something and they know that it's an illusion, but the audience doesn't necessarily know that it's an illusion. For the conjurer of the illusion, one who knows that it's an illusion, um, there to that person, mimon means they're not confused. They know, yeah, it was an illusion in the beginning, it's an illusion at the end. So when it ends, they're not upset or confused. However, for those who Yuma Mache, they don't know that it was illusory from the very beginning. Yongsu Se means they become thoroughly attached. So in his commentary to this, Chandrakirti uses the analogy of a conjurer who conjures up a very attractive woman. And for those of you who are attracted to males, you can imagine a very attractive partner of some kind. So when the magician conjures that up, they realize there's no real woman or man there. And so they're not confused, they're not attached to it because they know it's an illusion. But for the person who's fooled by it, then they become despondent when it dissolves, when it disappears, because they become very attached to it, right? And that's like us. That's like us. We've been beginningless chasing after these illusory things in the world as if they exist inherently. And that's the viewpoint of ego. I want, I want. I'll be happy only if I get this thing, right? And that's been our sad legacy from beginningless time. And so, really, the thing that wisdom gives us is the ability to shift out of that perspective into the perspective of the magician who's realizing, no, um, all of these things that arise to my sensory awarenesses, they come out of causes and conditions. They've never had any self nature to them. And so there's no use being attached to them. And that's a very powerful place to live if you can live in that perspective, because you don't get attached, you don't get upset when things aren't the way you want them to be. Which brings us, I think I said this last time when we were talking about this verse, but I'll go ahead and show you the image. really in dependent arising, the main two links that are being talked about here are up at the top, um, right under the monster's left fang, right? The monster of death. There's a blind man with a staff, and that represents our primordial ignorance at two levels. At a relative level, our ignorance doesn't understand cause and effect. It doesn't see how virtuous karmas lead us to happiness and negative actions lead us into sadness and suffering. And based on that ignorance, we end up starting to do things with our mind, with our speech, with our body. And that's the second link, initial karma, represented here by a potter who's shaping a clay into a pot. I mentioned last time, clay can take any form, right? And it can be made into a pot, can be made into an animal, it could be made to represent a deity. It just depends what you want to do to shape the karma, right? If the karma that we create is shaped by our mental afflictions and ignorance, it becomes a cause of suffering for us. If it's shaped by our virtue and by wisdom, it becomes a cause of happiness and liberation. So I mentioned two forms of ignorance. That's one form, the relative ignorance of not knowing cause and effect. At a deeper level, primordially, we've always held whatever our mental continuum um, encounters in terms of its makeup as a self. So in this life, we're holding to this particular body that we got from our parents as me and mine. In previous lives, whatever life we had, whatever body and form we had, that same ignorance held to that as me and mine. And in the life before that, the same way, right? And that's beginningless. That's that beginningless ignorance that is called jikten ah, the view of perishables, that view of our perishable heaps as if they exist from their own side and have some kind of self nature. That primordial ignorance is what drives this whole wheel of suffering. So those are the first two links, and those two links are what propel us into this life. Our present life, according to the Buddhist point of view, came from ignorance and karma. And during the bardo, as we were between lives, that ignorance and karma, whatever was the most powerful impulse at the time, shaped us into what we were to become in this life. The next 7 links, as I mentioned last time, have to do with this life. So that previous life's karma took over the bardo being, shaped it into what we were to become. And then the third link is the consciousness colored by that karma. And it's represented by a monkey grasping at fruit on a tree. And as it eats the fruit, the seeds fall on the ground. Similarly, our mind of this life, whatever karmic seeds kind of colored our consciousness, drove us towards our future birth. In the Bardo, it said that if we're going to be born human, the shape of the Bardo being is like a 5-year-old child, male or female. And if we are going to be born human, then we're attracted to our future parents when they're in sexual union. and drawn to that because of our desire. As we get closer to it, um, if we're going to be born male, generally, then there's attraction towards the female. And if we're going to be born female, there's more attraction to the male. And there's a whole description of this in Bardo teachings. But we're drawn into the union of the parents, and we begin, our mind enters into that fertilized ovum in our mother's womb. And that's represented by this link here. There's a boat with 4 riders in it. The boat represents the future life, our present life's body when it was forming in our mother. And the riders represent the other 4 skandhas of awareness, consciousness, feeling, conceptualization, and the formational factors or volitional factors. So that's in terms of what's actually happening in a human fetus. This is actually the development of the fetus in the mother's womb. At a certain stage, when that fetus, they're different, the Tibetans have different descriptions of fetal development, but when the fetus starts to develop sense powers, like eyes, nose, tongue, those ears, then that's represented by this next link. This 4th link is called name and form. And this next link in the development of that fetus is when the sensory powers start to come online. Those are the ayatanas, sense generators. They're represented like an empty house where the monkey mind is running around looking out of one window or another. And that's like the consciousness of the fetus starting to link up with one sensory awareness or another as the senses start to come online. And this does correspond. It's a little later into fetal development as a child starts to look like a child, as the embryo starts to develop childlike characteristics in the womb of the mother. And then later in infantile development in the womb, there's the coming together of the sense powers with their perceived objects. And this happens as fully developed fetus turns into a baby and eventually is born. And then that baby starts to experience phenomena in its new world. And this is represented by 2 lovers and embrace. And it represents the coming together of consciousness, the sensory power, and sensory objects. When that occurs, there's feeling, which is the next heap. This one is called contact, and the feeling link is called feeling, and is represented with a guy with an arrow in his eye. Ouch. And you can see this in infants. They're always experiencing sensations very raw, in a very raw way. And if they don't like it, they'll let you know. If they don't like what the sensory experience is, they're not quiet about it usually. If they do like it, then they're like all over it. Ah. You'll see in stages of infantile development, first it's all oral fixation. What am I going to put in my mouth? And then it goes to other zones in the body, that desire. So when feeling starts to occur, and Piaget called the early infantile development sensory motor, where, and you'll notice this in young children, it's all about their senses and exploring their world through their senses. Then the next link is initial desire. And that's as we're developing, we kind of figure out the things we really like that bring us pleasure. And in this case, it's represented by a young man enjoying a beer, right? And having that sense of, now I'm satisfied. And so we get our own, and this is based on our karma, we get our own repertoire of what things bring us pleasure. And we tend to seek those out. As we become accustomed to that in life, then that leads to the next link of um, of the becoming or ripening of karma called craving. So initial desires, as they're repeated, become addictions and craving. So in this verse, when it talks about the person who's not aware that this figure of the man or attractive woman is an illusion, for that person, their habit of desire toward that particular gender causes craving and clinging. It could be that sexual clinging, or it could be anything. For some people it's money, or for some people it's drugs or alcohol or food, or a house, right? It could be anything, but our attachment grows very strong. When that occurs, the initial karmas that we've created in our mind that have been ripened through the course of this becoming, those initial karmas become fully ripened and capable of bringing a result. And when they're fully ripened, then that leads to becoming, which is that 10th link that of this life. That's whatever the most ripened or immediate karma is when we die becomes the thing that we're going to become next, right? That's the throwing karma when we die that's going to shape where we're going. And then the last two links are the result in a future life of birth. And then once there's birth, then there's old age and death. So anyway, all those are being referred to in this verse when it talks about the person who's aware that things are illusory is not confused. That's because that person has gotten rid of this very first link of ignorance. If we can get rid of that very first link of ignorance, then we stop forming karma. And when we're not forming karma, then consciousness is not overcome by karmic formation, and that's not what drives birth and death. From a bodhisattva point of view, an Arya Bodhisattva and above is driven into rebirth to help others. And so it's not by the same impulses. Well, it is for a while, but at a seventh level Bodhisattva and beyond, it starts to be only driven by compassion and wisdom. And it's no longer driven by ignorance, hatred, and desire. So anyway, that's why this is important, is that we want to start dwelling in wisdom instead of ignorance. I see, Anila, you put your hand up. I didn't see when you put it up, so I'm sorry.
Just now. I just wondered about the ignorance. That's a direct realization of emptiness or just a understanding?
Well, it starts with understanding. There are three levels. They talk about learning, hearing, then contemplating, and then meditating, right? And so first you hear about it and you kind of entertain the notion, oh yeah, maybe things are empty of self-nature, right? But that's kind of like if you're cooking soup That's like the film on the top of the soup, right? Um, if you contemplate it more deeply, then it can start to have more of an effect on levels of your consciousness that are holding to yourself as if it exists inherently. Um, when you're able to control your mind to the point that you can stay in one pointed concentration and develop calm abiding, then within that state of mind, there's the power to use that conceptual realization that there's no self nature to you or your aggregates. Um, then that has the power to break through into a direct perception of emptiness. And when that happens, you wipe out any wrong views you accumulated through learning in this life. And you start then to chip away at the innate clinging to self that's been there beginninglessly. But then through the different boomies, that innate egotism starts to get less and less and less. It doesn't get wiped out until seventh, eighth boomy, and then it gets completely wiped out, and you become a Mahasattva, a great being, like an Arhat Bodhisattva, if you will.
So
So it takes a while.
when do you break that link? So that's when you say you break out of the first cycle of ignorance, is that
That's
when you're
that's
a Buddha or
that's when you're Mahasattva, when you've completely eliminated the afflictions of mind, then you've broken out of that link. There's still um, obscurations to complete knowledge that have to get gotten rid of to become a complete Buddha. And that happens over the three pure bhumis, getting rid of the obstacles to knowledge.
but we can make a
Um,
dent before that, right? Can't
oh, yeah.
we?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're making a dent. Instead of just hearing this, just contemplating the idea that yourself is not really the way you think it is. It's said to shake the foundation of samsara in your mind. And so just hearing about it or contemplating is considered very powerful. I see two more hands up, Jeev and Stevie. I think Jeev was up, his hand was up first. Is that okay, Stevie? Okay. Jeev,
Hi, Mr. Wilson. Nice to see you again.
good to see you.
Um, I just wanted to pick on your thoughts on Nagarjuna's difference with Vasubandhu's Swatantrika explanation. Because there's slight difference where I read like Nagarjuna lumps uh, the last three together, right? He says becoming and birth, aging and death. He lumps it together when Nagarjuna explains this. But then when I read Vasubandhu, he kind of goes samskara, feelings, and then birth, aging, and death together. Could you tell a little more about like what do you think about that? Like how should we read that differential?
Um, in a way, I'm not sure which text you're referring to be honest. I'd have to see them in front of me. But when you talk about feelings and samskara, right?
Right.
That
Yep.
sounds to me like you're talking about the Five Heaps Sutra. Is that the sutra you're referring to by Vasubandhu?
That's correct. Yeah. The book
Okay.
that you recommended actually.
So when Vasubandhu is talking about that in the Five Heaps Sutra, he's talking about our five aggregates. He's not necessarily talking about the links of dependent origination. Those are called nidana. And so in that text by Vasubandhu, he's talking about our five skandhas.
Right.
But he does refer, often in the text, he'll refer to the links of dependent origination. And so it just depends what part of the text you're quoting. But the feelings in that text, in Vasubandhu's looking at the five skandhas, the form heap is like the container of the other four skandhas, and in the links in the Nidana, that's why it's represented like the boat carrying the other four passengers.
Right.
Yeah, and there's one analogy to like cooking food, where the form that we're in is like the container cooking the food. And within that analogy, the feelings that we have, pleasure or pain or indifference, are like the food itself. And those are like prepared by who, right? That's the next step. But the feelings that we experience are the fruit of our karmic deeds in the past. And so that's the food we eat, either pleasurable, painful, or indifferent. And it was prepared by our past karmic actions. And then the third skandha of sometimes called the conceptual heap or the discrimination heap, but that's the part of us that looks at phenomena in the world and labels phenomena and finds words to describe them and is able to differentiate between different phenomena. And that's compared in this analogy of food to spices,
Right.
spices on the food that we're going to eat. And then the fourth skandha that Vasubandhu talks about, that is a samskara heap. And that's everything that's not included in the other heaps. So form heap, that's not a mental heap. That's a physical heap made out of the four elements, five elements if you include space. And then feeling is pleasure, pain, and difference is singled out as really important because our feelings of pleasure and pain, as well as the next heap, discrimination, conceptualization about things, that those two heaps are what drive most of the arguments in the world, right? How people feel about things and how they conceptualize them, right? If you look at most arguments and contention in the world, those two heaps are driving them. If you look at our current political malaise, it's like depending on what news station people are watching and who they believe and how they feel about it and conceive of it, it drives these very polarized stances. And so Vasubandhu in the Buddhist scheme considered those very important aspects to focus on for practitioners. And so gave them their own designation in the five heap schema. And then that fourth one, samskara, is really crucial because that contains within it volition, which is like the thing that drives karmic formation, is our volition. So within that, there are something like 49 other different impulses, good, bad, neutral, variable, from hate and anger and conceit and all those on the negative side to love, kindness, dispassion, on the positive side or virtuous side. And those are categorized as kusala, wholesome, or akusala, unwholesome, based on whether they produce suffering or well-being in our mind, both in the moment and then in the future too. So anyway, that's samskara, and it's within the samskara heap that we formulate our volitions for things, our motives for things when we're pursuing activities, and that's like the cook who prepares the food that we're going to eat in the future, right? That food being the feelings and the experiences we're going to encounter. And then the fifth heap is analogous to the consumer of the food, which is our consciousness, our mental consciousness and our five sensory consciousnesses. So that's what Bandhu is talking about. He's talking about that schema. It does all take place within the nidanas, you know, and I mentioned in the description of those, the third through the 10th link of dependent origination, how those links of dependent origination relate to our fetal development, birth, and direction in life in this life, right? And so all that's within that context of having five skandhas, right? And so they do link together. It's not that they contradict each other, but it's just a little different focus in those texts. I hope that answers your question. I don't know.
I don't know, it does. Thank you so much. One more question I had, Mr.
Yeah.
Wilson, was around three lives, right? So it starts first two, first three obviously is connected to prior life. Then we are saying, okay, the next seven is this life, and then we say the other one. So it's three lifetimes we're talking about, right? So
Yeah.
I kind of get a little confused. So we're only talking about three lifetimes of dependent origination on this chart. And so it could be that which three lifetimes is it connecting? It could be that I was a human being, say 50 lifetimes ago, and then I became a dog and a cat and a squirrel. And then I became a human being again, perhaps. And then I became, I don't know, a ghost after that, whatever it may be. So how do I wrap my head around these three lifetimes here when we talk about three lifetimes?
Okay. So these first three links of ignorance, karmic formation, and consciousness, those three links are called immature karma, and they're made in each instant. According to the Vaibhashika school, there are 60 moments. And each
Right.
of those, that's 60 moments within a snap of a finger, right?
Right.
It's thought that in each of those moments, we're creating those immature karmas based on these three links. And as you note in your description of it could have been 50 lifetimes in between the last time I was human and now, each of those immature karmas has the potential to launch a lifetime. And so we've got loads. Sarah Rinpoche said, you say, we're very rich in karma. We got loads of it in our continuum because we're creating it all the time as long as we're under the influence of ignorance. And that's our what's creating our actions and what comes out of our body, speech, and mind. So those are created constantly. And a karma, once created, can lay dormant for eons before it gives its result.
Right.
And so it's kind of like playing the lottery in terms of which karmic cause will come up at any given lifetime during the bardo. And so the karma that created this current life we're in, it could have been a karma that was created in our last life. Or it could have been a karma created 300,000 eons ago. we don't know, right? Those karmic seeds, as I say, can lay dormant for a long period of time. And so it's basically whichever one ripens near the end of our life and has been gone through these links to the point that it's matured and ready to give a fruit, whichever of those karmas is fully matured at the time of our death in our previous life, determined what kind of bardo we had in our current life. Whichever one comes to full maturation at the end of this life, when we die, will be the throwing karma that determines our next life. And so that's how that formula is seen. Does that answer the question, or?
Yeah, it does. It does. So we really cannot pinpoint. Like we can't put this into a box and say uh, this is this. This is one to one. It almost looks like it's a flux here.
Like playing the lottery.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that explanation.
Yeah. And that's one of the things in Buddhist teachings. A lot of the teachings that Buddha gave are only slightly hidden. And so we can figure them out relatively easily, like his teaching that unenlightened existence is full of suffering. Yeah, even these days, teenagers on their iPhones are figuring that out. And that's, sadly, it's increasing the suicide rate because so many people are realizing the truth of suffering and wanting out because they don't know how things work. They think by ending their life, that's going to stop it. And it doesn't, it makes it worse. But those teachings that Buddha gave, like the truth of suffering and its cause, are only slightly hidden. It said that his teachings on karma are the most hidden and the most difficult to understand because they're so complex. And that's why it said that only a fully enlightened Buddha can fully see exactly what cause led to what effect over so many lifetimes. It's a very expanded state of awareness. And so we can get a glimpse of it and kind of an intuition about what kinds of things we may have done early in life that have led us to where we are now. But to get a full, exact pinpoint of this result is because of this exact previous karma, it's said that only a Buddha can be that accurate.
Yep.
But we can get a sense of it as we go along. All
Thank
right,
you.
so sure. And there was another question, but Stevie, you took down your hand.
Well, basically, I took down my hand because can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay. Basically, I took my hand because I got so intrigued by this last question. I forgot what my question was, but I think it had something to do with that. You know, when is it that the direct perception can happen? I had to, for me, and maybe I want clarity on this. I don't think that the direct perception is an event. I think it has more to do with the accumulation of virtue through ethical discipline. Does that make sense?
yeah. In the schema of the 5 paths
Mm-hmm.
to correct knowledge, once we get genuine renunciation, we're on that first path
Right.
from a hearer's point of view or a Rattika Buddha's point of view. When we get genuine bodhicitta, we're on that first path of accumulation from a bodhisattva point of view, right? And in that, there are a lot of levels of trying to understand emptiness and getting closer to understanding it correctly and how that works with karmic causation. When we get to the second path of preparation, we've gotten some clarity conceptually about emptiness, and we've started to gain calm abiding. or the beginnings of calm abiding. And then there are 4 levels of the path of preparation, culminating in what's called the summit, or I'm sorry, the summit's earlier. Heat is the one after summit, and then I think the 4th is called the top of samsara, the highest point of samsara. That's when the mind starts to settle into calm abiding, real calm abiding, with an accurate conceptual understanding of emptiness. And so, yeah, there are glimpses all the way along. When that happens and we get to that highest point of samsara, highest dharma of samsara, and we're in that conceptual one-pointed concentration on the nature, the lack of self-nature of self and the aggregates, then it's said that that's like becomes an irreversible path. Nothing can knock us off course at that point. And the mind becomes so
Client.
so clearly and directly focused on the true nature of things that it goes into a non-conceptual direct experience. And so that is a big thing, right? That is a big step on our spiritual development, but it's been coming a long time, right? And so we've had a lot of getting our mind used to it. In fact, in the third stage of the path of preparation, where they call it forbearance, the mind has become used to the idea, hey, there's no real self here. And the aggregates are just that, they're aggregates. There's no real Wilson or Wilson's thing, right? That's a fiction. And the mind becomes used to it. And so that's already happened long before we see it directly. It's still at a conceptual level until the path of seeing.
I read the most beautiful treatise where Tilopa was telling Naropa about emptiness, and it was just like perfect. I'll have to send it to you. It was like poetry. It was just amazing. Anyways, I'm sorry I forgot my question.
You
That's all
should
right.
send it to all of us
Yeah.
Oh, I could. Yep, I
It's-
can do that.
in our
it's
next
probably,
class. Yeah.
is it Tilopa's Ganges Mahamudra?
Yep.
That's a beautiful text.
We should study that. Can
Okay.
you teach that up? Put it on the list. It
I'll
is
put it
the
on the
most.
list.
It's like Samantabhadra's prayer. I wept when I took it from a Kagyu Geshe, and I couldn't even take notes. I was weeping the whole time, but
I was
it's
I was
a
lucky.
beautiful text.
I got to hear a commentary to that by Garchen Rinpoche, a Kagyu
Oh,
Lama. And so, yeah, it's a
yeah.
beautiful,
Those Kagyus got something going on. I'm not sure what it is, but I got to tell you, they got something going on, don't they? I'm
hey,
serious.
it's an
They're,
authentic lineage.
it is. It really is. Yeah, I will figure out how to make this paper turn into something electronic
Oh,
and maybe get it there.
no, it's okay. I don't want to make, I'll
Oh
show
no, it's a big challenge for me. I always feel like I've had a breakthrough when I do it. I'll be happy to share. I just want to say I'll be happy to share it with everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I mean,
let's learn that, Wilson, one day.
well, in a way, we are,
Yes, we
because
are. That's right. Yes, we are.
the Gelugpa Mahamudra,
Mhm.
the extensive version of Gelugpa Mahamudra, is Nagarjuna's texts and commentaries by Chandrakirti, and
Mhm.
this is it. This is
It's
Mahamudra.
parallel. It is.
And
It is.
then Tsongkhapa also had a direct transmission of a certain version of it from Manjushri that's unique to Gelugpa.
Mhm.
And that got a commentary by the first Panchen Lama that we went through,
Mhm.
called the Kagyu Gelugpa Mahabudra tradition. So Okay. Anyway, good stuff. That's really good stuff. So this brings us to the 17th verse, right?
Mhm.
It'll probably be a while to get to the Ganges Mahamudra because we're still on verse 17, Regina, which is good. I like taking it slow because it's
That's
really
right. That's
it's
right. We
profound
have
stuff.
many lifetimes together. We have many lifetimes together.
Each verse is like intense Mahamudra chocolate, if you will. All right, so this one. Um, the first, it says SIPA. That seems like a misspelling to me. Um, I I believe the correct word there should be ngumpo, which means an entity. Um, if you use the word SIPA, then you could say an existent. But I think the correct word should be ngumpo. So ngumpo are produced things. So anything around us that can function and has causes and conditions that produce it is a ngumpo. So mik is migyu is a mirage, and drawar means like. So all entities produce things are like mirages. Loi, by the mind, Dongagyoa ni, the mind that sees that all produced things are like mirages. Ungi da, um, these are extreme views that it's talking about. Ungi ta is the viewpoint that there must be a beginning thing that got produced, right? And here the thing that Nagarjuna is refuting is any essence to the original cause of any entity, right? That entity would have some real nature to it when it's produced. Or any beginning, or chime means and, dar means extreme. Those two extremes that something is inherently produced or that something inherently ends are the two extreme views that he's looking at. Dawa, those extreme views. Yongsu Lemigur means they uh, le is like when something that's pure has something a pollutant added to it and it becomes corrupted, right? And so Yonsu Lemigur means will become completely uncorrupted. When you're able to see that all produced things are like mirages that are free of the extremes of production and cessation, then your view will become uncorrupted, undefiled, unpolluted. So this is talking about the post-meditation. We were talking with Stevie's question about the levels of correct view up to direct perception of emptiness. And when a yogi or yogini has that direct perception of emptiness, in the post meditation, all the phenomena of existence, entities will appear to them, but it loses its realness. You know, for the yogi or yogini, they appear kind of illusory like. because deceptively there's still the duality in the mind of the yogi or yogini until they become a Buddha. But they know that there's a false appearance there. Things are appearing as if they exist from their own side, but the yogi or yogini knows, no, they're dependently arisen. There's no real self nature to any of those appearances. So Gyume Khenser's comment to this, there's a Tibetan phrase, Nangsu Dang Netsu Mitumba. Nangsu Dan Netsu Mitumba. Nangsu means the way that things appear. Dang means and. Netsu, the actual way that those things abide. Mitung means are not in accord. So that's the post-meditation realization of the yogi or yogini who sees the appearance of things like illusions, but they know that the way that things appear is not in accord with how they actually exist. At the actual level, that yogi or yogini knows there's no inherent nature to anything that appears to them. So that wisdom, the name of that wisdom is Sursur Rongrik Yeshe, the wisdom of individual analysis that is used as we're contemplating the emptiness of things during the path of preparation. That wisdom turns into a direct wisdom at the path of seeing. When you're in the direct realization of emptiness, it's called the space-like meditation on emptiness. And when you come out of that, it's called J-Tob, after the achievement or post-meditation, when you come out of it. Which leads us to the next verse, which is the third section of the text. The first section kind of introduces the subject, and the second section takes you through a refutation of realist schools of thought. And then the third section is refuting the extremes, called Refuting the Extremes. So this verse is talking about people, it's showing the views of people who still have mistaken views about emptiness. Gandak, Gandakini Dujela means those who towards compound or conditioned things. Gedang Jipa Namtakpa, Ge means arisen. Jigma means destroyed. Namtakpa means imputing self-nature onto things as they arise or as they pass away. So that's talking about people who still have a sense of self existent, arising and passing. Dedak Tenjun Gorlo Yi, for them, Tenjung is dependent arising. Gorlo Yi, that wheel, by that wheel of dependent origination. Gorle Droa Ma Nami Top means for them, that Korlo is samsara, and its dependent origination is samsara. Spinning means, droa means spinning, turning around, the wheel of samsara spinning. Nambar Misheso means they thoroughly do not understand how samsara works, how samsara spins. So often samsara is compared to a firebrand. You know, at night, if you take a stick with some fire at the end and you go like this, it looks like a steady wheel, you know, and it can be deceiving. And so a person who sees that and thinks there's really a wheel of fire doesn't see it accurately, right? And so in a way, what Nagarjuna is saying is for people who are imputing or projecting a sense of self-nature into things as they arise, as they stay, and as they pass away, they don't have a clue about how samsara really works in terms of dependent arising. So the commentary refers to people like that as mikepa, unskillful people, leading to a secondary point, which is coming here on verse 19. Dedan, Detan, Ganjun De, Dedan, Deten, means this and that. This and that. Dedan, Deten. Den means dependent. Kongjun, whatever arises, whatever this and that arises in dependence, De, so it's talking about that. D is referring to internal things, like all the things that make up our sense of self internally. De refers like to the elements and all the things that make up the world. So all of that arises dependently. Rangi Ngo Gemayim. Rangi Ngo means a self-nature of this and that. Gemayin, nothing is born with any self-nature, this or that, internally or externally. Nothing has any self-nature. Rangi Ngompo, Gama Ke, let me see, let me make sure I have it right. Longing means self-nature. Gama Ke, that which is not born with any self-nature. Any, that thing that's born without any self-nature to it. Geshe Chitarja. How can you call that arisen? How can you call it born if it has no self-nature to it? Right? So let's take an example of a flower. Right? We'll say, my azaleas just bloomed. Right? In convention. They bloomed a while back, but let's just say, for argument's sake, they just bloomed, right? If you conceive those azaleas as having some existence on their own, then you've fallen into the extreme of imputing self-nature into them. But if you have a correct view, you'll realize that there never was any inherent azalea there. There was no inherent cause to it. And so nowhere in the causes and effects that produced the bloom was there any self-nature to it. So that's the correct view. If something exists before its cause, how can it be said to have been caused? So if you say, yeah, those are azaleas, but they haven't bloomed yet, you can't say that accurately, right? You can say that's an azalea bush, but it hasn't bloomed, right? And how can it be said to arise? So when a magician produces illusions of objects, it depends on special substances and charms. The artificial object that appears looks like the particular object, but it is not the real object. Similarly, all things are produced and depend on other things, and therefore are artificial and have no essence of their own. The two terms used in Tibetan are gyu, which means causes, and kin means conditions. So in the azalea, you need the cause, which is an azalea seed. And then you need the conditions of soil, moisture, warmth, growth over time, and flowering, right? So those are direct causes and contributing factors that force entities to appear, to arise. Without them, their respective entities cannot arise, which is one of the reasons that entities are considered illusion-like. So Sarah Rinpoche used to say, if you plant corn and you stand next to the field and you pray for wheat, it's not going to work, right? That for something to arise, you have to have the exact cause for it to rise. For that cause to arise, it has to have the appropriate conditions. When those things come together, then even if you pray for it not to arise, it's going to arise. So let's take like a lamp, an oil lamp. You know, you got the glass around it, you've got the wick, you got the oil, you got the flame, right? As long as all those conditions are there, you can say, oh, there's an oil lamp. It's giving light. But if the oil runs out, that flame is gone, right? That flame completely depends on the wick and the oil and the heat, right? Nowhere in its inception, its staying, or its stopping does that flame abide independently on its own. It is thoroughly dependent on the causes and conditions coming together to give that manifestation of a flame. And so it has no essential beginning or end, no independent beginning or end. It's all dependent on origination. So a realist might argue that any entity that arises must have an underlying essence. In fact, this is one of the schools, the lower school system's point of view, in order to serve as a basis for being ascribed. However, how can it be asserted that something arisen from causes and conditions has any nature of its own? And that's Nagarjuna's view. All right, we're almost at the end of the time. Should I do one more, or you guys, probably that would go over if I tried to do another one. Yes, Stevie. I can't hear you though, Stevie. Your mic's off.
The flame goes out. You've got the lamp. It has arisen from these causes, right? And the flame goes out. Now what is it?
It's well, we could still call it a lamp, but it's a lamp where the fuels run out.
Mhm.
And so we know that it can't produce a flame at that
Well,
point.
let's take a seed. So you plant the seed, it becomes a sprout, the sprout becomes a flower,
Yeah.
right? And then the flower wilts and dies, right?
Right.
Where's the seed? where's the seed? You know, I mean, I just, I think
We
it's in the
haven't,
next verse, actually. I think it's,
actually, we haven't gotten there yet, but he's about to go there.
yeah,
Um,
good. Okay. I can hang on then.
But, well, let me say this much and then we'll come back to it. For a cause to give a result,
Uh-huh.
the cause cannot be present at the time of the result.
Mm,
So by the time that the flower comes, the seed has ended, right?
okay. Yep. I'll chew on that for another 6 weeks till we do this class again.
All right. Well, we'll stop here.
Thank you,
let me-
Wilson.
Sure. I'll go back to the closing prayers.
Wilson,
Yeah.
this is Sharon.
Hi, Sharon.
Been quiet. I taking another class where we're, learning about emptiness, but how to do it for Nagarjuna. And one of the things that we were introduced to was the chariot and how you take it apart, put it back together, what part is actually a chariot. And I found that just so profound that, when I look at objects outside, I find myself doing that now.
That's
I
a
don't
good
know if it's
yarmulke
even helping
trained.
me, but
That's exactly what we start doing when we're introduced to this. That's called the um, Barton Hole approach to realizing emptiness, where you take a chariot and you think of where is the chariot, and then you think of its parts and mentally take them apart, and there's no chariot in any of the parts.
yeah. So,
Um,
and you can do that with yourself. Is
Yeah.
this, so I thought that was an interesting thing to learn. It does have to do with this too. I can see
Yeah.
where.
Yeah, all of those, there are classic arguments within Madhyamaka logic that are
Mhm.
used to take the student into a view of emptiness, and that's one of them. It's called part and whole. The one we're on now is dependent origination. Things don't have self-nature because they arise dependently. But all of those are valid reasoning to get to the point that no entity has any self-nature to it.
Well,
So,
it's good practice for me because I don't consider myself like extremely analytical. So it's been very beneficial for me to learn that,
I think it plants a
especially.
good
What's
seed.
that?
I think it plants a good seed in our minds,
Mhm.
that even if we can't get to those high levels of realization in this life, I think it's good seeds for future lives. Hopefully we can get to direct realizations and make some real progress. But even if not, it's worthwhile, I
It
think.
still transforms your world around you when you learn about it. That's how I see it. So,
Yeah, it transforms our perceptions of the world,
mhm.
and that transforms us. So it's good stuff. Sashi Boogie Joji Medota Rira Linjin in the Gambadi Sange Shindu Meda Wagi Dogunanda Jinga Jubajo Idon Guru Rana Mandala Kameya Tayami Gewati Gewokon Sunami Jeso Sojin Sunami Shele Shungwe Dambo Kuni Dobasho Jonju Sanjo Rinpoche Amaya Bana Gegeji Yaba Mepa Yang Gone Gondo Bawashu Gari Rawe Goe Jingande Abendante Wamalo Juene Genreze Wandens and Gyato Ye Shebe Side Badu Dengyor Chi.
Yay,
Okay.
Wilson, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Wilson
guys.
also live long.
You
Yeah.
guys
Live,
too. Everybody
live
stay
long, keep
healthy.
teaching.
Thank
Live
you,
long,
Wilson.
keep teaching.
Thank you,
Thank you, thank
Wilson.
you, thank
And
you,
teach
everyone.
again soon.